first meeting.
Well, it's 7 o'clock, so I will just welcome everyone and get us started. We'll, as always, there are technical difficulties and we'll get them sorted out, so don't worry about it. But welcome everyone. We haven't had an AC Connect session in a few months, so I'm glad that many people could make it. And I think this is one of those times, well, we know there's lots of changes in the field and coming from government. And so I think we all want to know what's out there. So as we get started, I just want to acknowledge to the land that we're on, and I'll acknowledge the land that I'm on as well as the land that ACE's office is on, because I'm in Calgary and they're in Edmonton. So the AECEA office is located in Treaty 6 territory and within the Métis homelands and Métis Nation of Alberta Region 4.
Still can't hear you.
And I'm in the Treaty 7 lands and the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. And we acknowledge this land as the traditional territories of many First Nations, such as the Nehiyah, the Cree, the Dene Saline, the Dene, the Nakota Sioux or Stoney, the Anishinaabe or Saulteaux, and the Niitsitapi, the Blackfoot Nations. And the reason for that land acknowledgement is really to support our understanding of respectful relationships and acknowledging that the land and where we come from is an important part of all of us, and particularly our truth and reconciliation journey. So just a reminder, since we haven't been together in a little while, we're really excited to welcome our guests tonight, and I'll let them introduce themselves. But just a reminder that our AC Connect sessions are really kind of founded on communication and respect. So sharing what information from the field and creating a safe space. So just keep that in mind when you're sharing questions in the question box, or if there's an opportunity for you to ask a question or provide any feedback. So we will be recording the session to make it available on the AC webpage. And we always keep, even if we don't answer the question you put in the question box, we as administrators have those questions on file afterwards. And so we do try and get back to people if possible with information or follow up after the session. So please feel free to use the question box to put any questions and comments in. And I will let our guests take it away because they are ready.
Great, thanks Leah, thanks so much. I'm just going to give a brief overview of the session, and then we'll do some brief introductions. So thank you so much for joining us today. I see we have 139, 140 attendees right now. It's still growing, and I see lots of familiar names in the list. So thank you so much for joining us tonight so that you can hear about this competency-based model for early childhood educators. So just to give you a bit of background, in November, the Government of Alberta put out an RFP for a consultant to develop a competency-based model for certification. So AC brought together a group of experts, group of experts in early learning and childcare, and teamed up with Ottawa-based HRSG, which stands for Human Resource Systems Group. And they have a long history of developing competency frameworks, and we submitted a joint proposal to Children's Services. We were delighted to be awarded the contract, and we've been really busy since early December working on this project. So the overall objective of this project is to develop a competency-based. The overall objective of this project is to develop a competency-based model that will set foundational requirements for increasing knowledge of early learning and child development theory and application. So, we do look forward to your questions and your comments. We might not get to answer questions. We're going to try and give you as much information about the project as possible. So what we would really ask you to do is what Leah said, was put your questions and comments into the chat. We're going to compile all of your feedback there, and then we will group the questions together, and we'll provide key answers to those key questions on the website. So we also want you to know that engagement with you is really important, and it's a really important part of this project. So your questions will help us inform engagement activities. So I'm going to go into more details towards the end of the presentation about how you can get involved and how you can be engaged. And so this is a list of our the AC and the HRSG project team. I'm not going to introduce the whole team. We're just going to do quick, brief introductions of the ones that have joined us tonight. So I'll start. And so I'm Nikki DeBlanco, and many of you know me. I was past chair of the Association of Early Childhood Educators for a number of years, and also board member. And so now my role is special advisor to the board and members, and I am the team lead for the AC team. So I'll pass it over to Kathleen.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Kathleen Flanagan. I am based in PEI. I've been working in the field of early learning and childcare for at least 40 plus years now, and working as a consultant in matters related to the workforce, curriculum, and strategic policy initiatives across the country and around the world, actually. So happy to be here, and I'll just pass it on.
Hey everybody, I'm Jane Beach, and also very pleased to be joining you tonight. I'm based in Victoria, British Columbia, and like Kathleen, have been in the sector longer than I care to admit, but more than 40 years, and working on human resources issues, systems building, and data collection on everything that happens in early childhood education around the country. And I'll pass it over to you, Lorraine.
Hi. Hello, everyone. Lorraine McKay, and I'm the project manager for this project. With the Human Resource Systems Group team, HRSG's been working in the field of competency-based management for 34 years almost, and so we're very pleased to participate in building the competency framework, the certification framework that's built on that, and the assessment tools, among other things. Thanks everyone for your participation.
Thanks, Lorraine. Okay.
Okay, so Nikki, I think I'll take it from here.
Take it from here. Okay, thanks.
Just for the next few slides. So as Nikki mentioned, the overall objective of this project is to develop a competency-based assessment for certification. In doing so, sort of the goals and the outcomes of the project are to further professionalize the sector and to look at ways to have wider entry into the profession, especially for people who might live in rural and remote areas where there's not easy access to post-secondary education, and looking at ways of opportunities for people to build their competencies and increase their levels of certification and opportunities for professional development along the way. Okay, Nikki, if you could go to the next slide, please. Thanks. So these are the key things that we're working on in a really short time frame. As Nikki mentioned, we started this in mid-December, and our goal is that all the work will be completed by the end of April. So these 5 items here are really our key deliverables. So first of all, we started with background research and analysis, looking at what other jurisdictions do around certification. What do other competency frameworks look like? This is both in early childhood education and some related sectors. Developing a competency framework that looks at the skills, knowledge, and abilities that early childhood educators need to deliver high quality childcare to Alberta families and children. Looking at a progressive career map. So depending on how you come into the sector, if you come straight out of high school and you go and do a 2-year diploma at community college, or if you come in with little formal education and you have a lot of experience, how can you increase your competencies, whether it's through additional courses or other means. And looking at our current levels of certification and determining whether the competencies fit within the existing framework or if there are opportunities to change some of it. We're also looking at a total compensation review for ECEs, and many of you will know that some work has already been done in that area, but that will be expanded upon. And then developing evaluation tools. So how will these competencies be assessed? Will it be through a combination of observations, exams, portfolio development? That's to be determined, but that's where we will end up. Okay, Nikki, next slide. So this is what we've done to date. So we have completed our background research. We've done a fairly comprehensive jurisdictional scan on different certification models, mostly in early childhood education in Canada. Looked at competencies from a variety of perspectives, both in ECE and other professions, but this is beyond our border, so in a number of the United States and in Europe. And we also looked at the post-secondary education and supports that are available in Alberta. We thought it was important to see how available and flexible current opportunities are for people to get their post-secondary credentials in early childhood education. What do those learning outcomes look like? Do they align with what we think competencies need to be? So we've completed that activity, and we're in the process right now of developing draft competency framework that will be part of what we go out to engage with many of you, in our engagement plan, and then looking at options for certification models. And again, taking that out to consult with different parts of the sector. Okay, Nikki. So just for a little bit of context, we think it's always important to take a look at what's the current context for this work. So we took a look at some of the strengths and challenges that we have found in Alberta. So a lot of strengths to build on. First of all, there's a wide range of post-secondary learning options, that have multiple delivery models. So a lot of flexibility and opportunities for people to get post-secondary education. And the Alberta government is putting a lot of money into supporting people to take post-secondary courses and also for opportunities for professional development. You have the very strong flight framework, which really is leading edge in terms of pedagogy of play and understanding children as rights holders, and really reflecting current knowledge and thinking about early development of children. We have the Canada-wide agreement that Alberta signed last year that provides considerable funding with the intent of building a comprehensive quality childcare system that is available for all families who need it at an affordable cost. So considerable investments going into the childcare system. And also, while Alberta doesn't have a wage scale, it does have wage enhancement, and that is tied to certification levels. So hopefully that does act as a bit of an incentive for individuals to seek higher levels of certification. Okay, next slide. And then there are some challenges. Alberta is not the only province for sure that is experiencing a shortage of qualified staff. This is an overall problem right across the country, but it does make it challenging to look at higher levels of certification, enhancing competencies when there's such a shortage of qualified staff to begin with, but that becomes part of an overall workforce strategy that Alberta has indicated that it's going to be developing. One of the things that Alberta doesn't do that a number of other jurisdictions do is require certification to be renewed. It's usually every 3 or 5 years, and typically there are professional development requirements, so many hours of professional development that are required. Or in some other situations, people who are at entry level are required to be engaged in ongoing post-secondary courses while they have that level of certification. So that's definitely something that we're looking at. And to ensure that there's greater alignment between certification, education, and learning outcomes and professional development, so that when people are becoming certified and gaining their post-secondary credentials, that those learning outcomes are aligned with the needs of employers and of the sector. And there are some lessons to be learned from Alberta's previous experience in competency assessment with the former LEAP program that was around for about 10 years. And we have heard that one of the biggest challenges for the sector, apart from the time it took to complete, was the fact that people who went through the process got certified but didn't end up with a post-secondary credential, which kind of limited their career path opportunities. So those are some of the challenges that we're keeping in mind as we go forward. Okay, next slide, please. So looking at the post-secondary offerings that are across the province right now, first of all, we did take a look at the Alberta Credential Framework, which outlines sort of what the expectations are for graduates at various levels, whether it's certificate, diploma, post-diploma certificate, a degree, a master's degree, a journeyman apprentice. So they all have expectations of graduates. And we noticed that for a certificate, the expectation is that graduates will be set for an entry-level job with a narrow scope of focus under supervision. And we're aware that the demands of the job are far greater than that. So we want to make sure that the expectations for a certificate graduate are aligned with reasonable competencies, and how does that fit with the framework. We did notice that all post-secondaries, public post-secondary institutions, have a process for prior learning assessment and recognition. So if you do come with a lot of experience and work background, that you can PLAR courses, so you don't necessarily have to start from square one. We know that there are a number of transfer agreements among the public post-secondary institutions. So if you do 1 year at one post-secondary, chances are if you move to a different one, you will be able to go straight into the second year of your diploma. We were quite, I guess, impressed with the variety of delivery models and options that are out there, both in person, online, sort of at your own pace, or instructor-led online learning, different things like apprenticeship models, micro-credentials, a couple of post-diploma courses in administration and management. So quite a range of opportunities. And we are aware that Alberta in general is expanding apprenticeship-style models in sectors other than the traditional skilled trades that we typically think of with apprenticeship. And so these are work integrated learning models, so people can continue to go to school, continue employment while they're completing their credential. And next slide, please. So a couple of things to keep in mind, that unlike a number of other provinces, there is no common province-wide program standard for ECE. So there are a lot of similarities, but also some differences across institutions as to what kind of learning outcomes they do have. As I mentioned before, there's a lot of flexibility in how people can get ECE credentials in Alberta. And in doing a short little questionnaire with the post-secondary institutions, we learned that many of them do use occupational standards for early childhood educators that were developed by the Child Care Human Resources Sector Council back in 2010, so quite a while ago, but they are still used to inform course development and develop learning outcomes. That practicums are currently used to assess competencies with the expectation that when students graduate, they do have the necessary competencies for the workforce. And we also learned that flight is increasingly used for course development beyond the occupational standards, and that it's also widely used for professional development that's delivered at post-secondary, and also that post-secondaries, well, particularly Mount Royal, collaborating with community partners to deliver flight courses, and MacEwan actually directly delivering them with mentors around the province. So a lot of activity in post-secondary education. So now I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen, who is going to continue with things we found. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Jane. So one of the other things that we've been looking at is how certification is handled across the country and actually around the world. And one of the things that we learned, which was a bit of a surprise, is that the process of certification as it is in Canada is quite unique to Canada. In other countries, they don't certify early childhood educators as we do. There may be titles, there might be a title of a lead teacher or an assistant, but the actual process of reviewing the post-secondary credential and issuing a certificate at a particular level, that's very, very unique to Canada. And even within Canada, we know that certification is not part of the policy framework or the processes used in New Brunswick, although New Brunswick is working on developing something. It's not used in Quebec, it's not used in the Northwest Territories, and it's not used in Nunavut. In those jurisdictions, licensing requirements would require that a director of a program holds a certain level of qualification or a particular kind of post-secondary credential. The same with the number of staff who might need certain kinds of qualifications, but there are no certificates that are issued. So they're not certified at a level 1 or 2 or 3. It's all done through licensing. In fact, in Nunavut, there are no post-secondary requirements or qualifications outlined in their current legislation for people who are working in licensed programs. The other thing we found is that across the country, there's different terminology and types of levels. So a level 2 in Alberta might be a level 1 somewhere else. A level 3 in Alberta might be a level 2 or a registered early childhood educator in another province. So there's a lot of variation across the country in the language that's used, and the levels don't necessarily match up to the credentials. So if you were in Alberta and you were a level 3 and you moved to PEI, where I am, you would be a level 2. So it's not that it's a demotion in the level, it's just the different kinds of language. So there is only one province, and that's Ontario, that has a protected title and a College of Early Childhood Educators. So I'm sure many of you know that the College of Early Childhood Educators is a self-governing body in Ontario. It has its own legislation, and the College of Early Childhood Educators, through their legislation, protects the title of early childhood educator. And so someone is not able to call themselves an early childhood educator unless you are registered with the college. The other thing about Ontario is that there's only one level. It's a registered early childhood educator. So it doesn't matter whether you have a 2-year diploma or whether you have a PhD in early childhood education, you will still be a registered early childhood educator. There are some provinces that do recognize credentials beyond the diploma level. So that would be Newfoundland, PEI, Nova Scotia, and Manitoba. And so those provinces recognize either degree level, or sometimes it's a case of an early childhood diploma with additional post-diploma training. Again, there are some provinces, not all, that require renewal of certification and or a maintenance of certification. So those would include Newfoundland, PEI again, Nova Scotia, I guess that's most of the Atlantic, isn't it? Ontario and BC require some renewal. So that might be an annual renewal, it might be up to a 3-year renewal. And in some cases, you are required to complete a certain amount of professional development in order to get that renewal approved. The number of hours of professional development, they really vary among those provinces, but mostly in the same general range of number of hours over a period of time. I should mention as well, and it's not a bullet on the slide here, but that in Yukon, if you have received your certification based on equivalency, then you have an annual renewal of that certification, and there's an expectation of completion of 30 hours of professional development. For everybody else who has an actual early childhood diploma, that there's no requirement for renewal. So it's only for people who have achieved their certification through equivalency. And across the country, there are different kinds of requirements to achieve that certification. So it could mean training completion, and that's typically relevant to people who have entry-level training. A post-secondary credential, so that could be a certificate or a diploma from a post-secondary institution or a degree. In some cases, the work experience matters in terms of the level of certification. And in 2 provinces, there's an assessment process, and I'm going to get to that in a few minutes, that would allow somebody to achieve a level of certification. So next slide, Nikki. So Alberta's certification, so it's thought, I would explain a little bit as to how Alberta relates to the rest of the country in terms of their certification. So in Alberta, there are no additional certification levels beyond a 2-year ECE diploma. So that would be your level 3. So if you had a diploma or a bachelor's degree, you would both be certified at a level 3. In Alberta, certification is based on training. And so that could be the level 1 training, whether it's a 45-hour early childhood course, or whether it's the online program, or whether it's one of the dual credit high school programs. So it's based on either training or post-secondary credentials. They're in Alberta, probably more than any other jurisdiction, there is some flexibility in recognizing equivalencies in education. There are some provinces that will not consider equivalency at all for certification. In some provinces, and again, Manitoba is a good example, and I'll talk to that in a few minutes, but in Alberta, the equivalencies are actually outlined in the policies around certification. And as Jane mentioned earlier, there is no requirement to recertify or maintain the certification in Alberta. And Alberta is not the only province that does that, but it seems to be something that is being considered more and more in other provinces because of the kind of evidence that's coming forward about the importance of professional development in terms of the quality of the program and the competency of the early childhood educator. The entry-level requirements in Alberta are pretty much on par with other provincial or territorial entry levels. Across the country, entry-level requirements range from 40 hours, which is Manitoba, up to about 120 hours of training. So it's quite a range, but it's generally based on training and not necessarily a post-secondary credential. And we know that the requirements for family day homes have recently changed in Alberta, and now family day home providers are required to have a level 1 certification. That's basically the same as what's required in Newfoundland and Labrador, in PEI, Manitoba, and Yukon. But in many provinces or territories, there are no requirements in terms of qualifications for family day homes. Next slide, Nikki. So one of the other things that we did was look at certification in other professions. So we looked at teachers, kindergarten to grade 12 in a couple of provinces, registered practical nurses in Ontario, registered nurses in Alberta, physiotherapists in Alberta, and homeopaths in Ontario. All of those professions seem to link their certification to competency frameworks. And the beginning point of certification is a post-secondary credential. So the requirements for certification in these professions that we've looked at would require the education as a starting point, perhaps a written exam, an assessment, and some verification of work experience. And typically there's a period of time that people are allowed to become employed, and within that period of time, they are expected to achieve some level of certification. Next slide, Nikki. So as Jane mentioned, we looked at early childhood education competency frameworks across Canada and in the United States and in Europe. And really, it was very striking that there was a high level of consistency of the types of competencies that were listed in these various frameworks. So we looked at the occupational standards, the Canadian occupational standards for early childhood educators and for childcare administrators. And we reviewed the profiles for people who work with infants or people who are working in school age programs. And so, although the first set of occupational standards was developed by the Canadian Childcare Federation, the revised standards for early childhood educators and all of the other standards were developed by the former Childcare Human Resources Sector Council. But we also looked at 2 provinces in Canada that use competency frameworks for certification, and that would be Manitoba and Nova Scotia. And I'm again going to speak to those in a few minutes. We looked at the United States, and we looked at the competency framework that was developed by the National Association for the Education of Young Children. And that framework seems to guide the development of competency frameworks in a number of states across the country. So we looked at Massachusetts, we looked at Pennsylvania, we looked at California, we looked at Hawaii, and we again found considerable consistency from one state to the other, and they all seem to be very consistent with the framework that was developed by the national organization. We also looked at Europe, and the European Union has just completed a multi-year, multi-country a project where they looked at core competencies. And their competencies, again, are consistent with the list that's in front of you. But it was interesting that the European Union work, they also identified that an early childhood educator cannot be competent unless they are working in a competent system. So I'm not going to read through the common competency areas, but I will tell you that in no case outside of Canada were the competency frameworks used for certification. They had other uses. So they may have used them for descriptions of what's the knowledge, skills, abilities that are required for early childhood educators. They were used to help promote the recognition of the profession and outline the actual work that was being done. They're very often used for professional development and to identify different opportunities or different approaches to professional development for people working in the early learning and childcare sector. They were often used within centers for performance evaluation to look at the kinds of skills and knowledge and competencies that staff were expected to demonstrate. They were very, very often used for curriculum development. And as Jane mentioned, the occupational standards were often used even in Alberta, which is that's where we looked at the post-secondaries, that the occupational standards were used in developing curriculum in those programs. And they were often used for recruitment, that this is what you are expected to do. This is what the nature of the work is like, to talk about the competencies that people are expected to demonstrate when they work in early childhood or early learning and childcare programs. Next slide, Nikki. So as I mentioned, there are 2 provinces in Canada that use competency-based assessment for certification, and that's Manitoba and Nova Scotia. So in Manitoba, this is called the ECE2 assessment program, and there are 4 streams in this program. And this has recently been updated. So in 2018-2019, Manitoba introduced the competency-based assessment for people in northern communities who did not have any post-secondary credential, but had at least 5 years of experience. And they built in a number of supports around those individuals, and they were allowed to demonstrate competencies according to the program's framework. And they would be able to achieve a level 2, which is equivalent to an ECE diploma in Manitoba. They also have what's called the PLA, the Prior Learning Assessment. And the PLA has been in place in Manitoba since about 1985. And it's had varying degrees of uptake over the years. But the PLA requires a person to have 2 years of experience and a post-secondary credential in another field of study. They must also have the entry-level certification in Manitoba, which is a child care assistant level, which amounts to 40 hours of training in early childhood education. And then they are able to, then they're eligible to take on the prior learning assessment process. And I should have mentioned that even in the CBA with 5 years of experience and no post-secondary credential, the individual is required to have that child care assistant certification. The MPLA is a modified prior learning assessment process where an individual, if they have a post-secondary credential in another field of study, and they have a diploma in, or a post-secondary credential in early childhood education from a post-secondary that is not recognized by Manitoba, they are able to embark on this prior learning assessment process and gain their equivalency of level 2 certification, equal to a diploma. And then the IEQ is the International Education Qualification process. And again, individuals are allowed to challenge for those competencies to achieve their certification, along with other requirements in terms of the assessment of their international credential. In Nova Scotia, the recognition of prior learning and assessment program is fairly new. It was introduced in the 2018-2019 year as a pilot. And so in the recognition of prior learning and assessment program, an individual can have another but lower level of certification. So it could be entry level, could be a level 1, or it could be the school age approval program. And so they are able to embark on this process to be able to achieve their level 2 certification, which again in Manitoba would be equivalent to an early childhood diploma. So there are some things that are the same about both of those approaches in Manitoba and Nova Scotia. One is that they only look at the 2-year early childhood diploma level. And once a person is successful through that process, they achieve that level 2 diploma level certification, but they do not earn a credential. So they don't come out with a diploma that they could move on to perhaps a degree program. In both of those provinces, the competency-based frameworks are linked to provincial post-secondary standards, which do not exist in every province. You don't have them in Alberta. We don't have them in PEI. Many provinces don't have them, but in these 2 provinces, those frameworks are linked to the post-secondary standards. Both of the provinces require English proficiency at language benchmark level 7, which is fairly common across the country. They both require some specified either years or hours of experience, and it varies between the provinces and among those levels. And both of those provinces require that the person would hold an entry or at least a lower level of certification. But there are some pretty significant differences between the 2 provinces. Manitoba requires that the person coming into the program is currently employed in a center-based program, and that the center's director has given, is on side, has given approval for this person to take on this, this process. And there needs to be a peer assessor identified within that person's place of employment, and that peer assessor must have a level 2 or 3 level of certification. In Nova Scotia, they don't require that you're currently employed. They require that you have some previous experience, but as you go through this process, you do not need to be currently employed. And the assessment of prior experience is different in the 2 provinces. In Manitoba, they only look at center-based experience. In Nova Scotia, they look at your experience in any kind of a regulated early learning and childcare setting. So family home childcare, school-age childcare, center-based for preschool children, all of those things are considered as prior experience in Nova Scotia. The process is very different in each province. In Manitoba, the person going through this process, regardless of what stream they might be in, they are required to build a bit of a profile, their own portfolio of their qualifications based on the competencies that are outlined in the framework. In Nova Scotia, there's an actual exam and there is a situational interview. So people prepare for that exam and they prepare for that situational interview. In Manitoba, there are no fees involved. Government absorbs all of the costs of the program. There might be fees that a person would incur in terms of developing their portfolio, whatever kinds of materials they might need to purchase to do that. In Nova Scotia, there are fees at each step of the way. So there are fees at the application process to make sure that you're actually qualified to come into the program, and then there are fees for the exam component of the process, as well as for the situational interview. The fees in Nova Scotia amount to approximately $3,000 per person. Now, government has been putting some funding into this initiative, this recognition of prior learning, so that many people have been funded to go through the program. One of the overall things that both provinces report that seems to be very, very important to individuals going through whichever type of an assessment program they're in is the level of support for the person going through the program. And both have found that that's very important. And in fact, in Manitoba, for their CBA program, which is for people without any kind of post-secondary credential, but with the 5 years of experience, that particular stream has enhanced supports built in for those individuals. And I think it's back to you now, Nikki.
Nikki, for some reason, we can't hear you. Or maybe it's just me.
No, it's me because I'm just talking
there we go.
muted here. Okay, so I was saying just to myself was that as you can see, it's quite complex. And so lots of background research has been conducted by the AECEA and HRSG team. So, and lots of information analyzed as we move forward here. So, so next steps are we will be engaging with stakeholders, and we will continue to get input from our advisory committee, which is a number of representatives from Children's Services that that we will meet. We meet with every few weeks to go over the steps of the project, finalize deliverables, and we do have an anticipated completion date at the end of April. So it's a really, really big project, and lots of things happening simultaneously, and lots of things happening really quickly. So I just wanted to briefly talk about engagement with stakeholders like you. So we will be looking to consult with ECEs and people working in a variety of work settings, so family day homes, family day home agencies, facility-based childcare centers, people working in post-secondary educational settings, preschools, school-age programs, and of course looking urban, rural, and remote to make sure that we're getting representation from across the province so we can hear from everyone regardless of where you are in the province. And so the roles that we will be looking for are to consult with our people working as family day home educators, childcare consultants, ECEs, people working in supervisor and management roles, and those that are teaching and training our future ECEs and the students, and then those that are working with curriculum design. So we will also be looking to chat with people that, or engage with people that are currently certified and how they got certified. So some will have received certification, you know, depending on the level, if it was with a 1-year certificate or a 2-year diploma or even further, and those that are also trying to achieve some level of certification. So those could be people that are currently working and trying to get certified at a higher level, or say individuals that may be coming to Alberta from internationally, have a training that they received internationally. So, and then of course, a variety of years of experience of people that have been working in the field, because we know that there's, you know, there's people with lots of experience out there that have been in the field and committed to this field for a number of years. So I am going to share with you. So in order for us to connect with you, we're hoping that you will be able to click on this link. I'm going to put it in the chat as well. And so with this link, you will be able to access a form, and it'll just ask you for some information so that we can try and get some information about you, like what I was just saying, but where you are in the province, what type of setting you're working in, what's your role, that kind of thing. So please do, if you're interested in being engaged in this project, it's really important work, as you've heard. Please fill out this form, and then we will be in touch with you over the next few months to engage you and get your feedback as we move forward. So, so this is our first point of engagement, actually, is this webinar, and so we will continue to, you know, do more outreach like this if we, depending on what the response is from you tonight. We could do another online webinar like this, and possibly do some focus groups this way. We will be doing focus groups. We have decided that given the project is happening so quickly, that we will be doing all our focus groups online, and then we will be reaching out to some people and organizations and associations directly as technical experts to provide feedback to us as we are developing the competency framework and models, and also the compensation review, and as we develop tools for assessment. So that's the gist of our engagement process, and I think we actually do have a few minutes if we want to try and answer some questions tonight. And I'm going to put this link in right now so that you can access it. So Leah or Janet, do you mind reading out a couple of the questions if there's any there in the chat?
So there's really only one question. Some people are saying they can't get the link, but you're putting that in the chat, so that's fine. The one sort of main question that came is Canada trying to get all the provinces on the same sort of system for credentialing?
Well, I could take an attempt at answering that. Not that I'm aware of. I do a lot of work with all the provinces and territories, and I have not been advised of any attempt to create one Canadian certification system or any kind of credentialing system. So not that I'm aware of.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Kathleen. So if anyone else does have a question, you can either put it in to the question area, or if you want to, you can put your hand up and then we can unmute your microphone.
There is another question in there now.
Yes, there are some more questions coming in.
Okay, go ahead. I'll let you do it.
Once the project is complete, how will this influence all of Alberta's ECEs moving forward?
That's what the team, I guess that's, we don't know the answer to the question yet. We're just finishing up the background research, and then as we develop the recommendations back to the advisory committee and that, then then those and options are presented. So right now we're looking at the competencies that exist at each level of certification.
If I could jump in, there are objectives that the province wants to achieve, and these, these were shown at the very beginning. They have to do with further, professionalizing the field, ensuring there's a career path for people. What is the path to development, to continuous development and recognition? So those are a couple of the real key achievements that we would hope impact everybody who's an ECE, as well as more access to the field so that more people can gain this certification and entry.
Thanks, Lorraine.
And I mean, maybe I'll just add for clarity that what you're working on is an RFP, so a request for proposal for the government. And so in the end, this work goes to them and they decide how they use it. So we really don't have an answer about what will happen here, sadly. There is a question about whether or not people can pass that link, this link that we have to your form, on to others who might be interested. Is it sort of open for everyone to fill out?
Yes, and we will, the presentation will be posted after as well, and then the link will be available there as well. So, and we'll continue to put the link out through social media and through the newsletters and that way too. So yes, please share the link as far and wide as you like.
Okay, we have more questions coming now. So there is a question about whether those who are certified through the free online course in Alberta, would that impact their future working in Alberta? Would they also be eligible for assessments in other provinces if they were new in the field? So I think the question is around, would you still be able to work if you had the online level 1 course, and how is that factoring into the competency-based framework? And
yeah, Kathleen, I'm wondering if you want to sort of say how it is across provinces.
Yeah. Okay. Sure, I was just trying to find my unmute button here.
Okay.
Sorry. Our understanding is that anything that we're doing is not impacting anybody's ability to continue to work at whatever level they're certified at. So, so having said that, part of the question had to do with working in other provinces. There is something in Canada called the Canada Free Trade Agreement, and in that agreement there is a chapter on labor mobility, and that chapter says that if you are certified in a province or one territory that does issue certificates, then you have the right to be recognized at that level in any other province that also issues certificates. So if you were at an entry level, let's say you had a 45 or a 54-hour course in early childhood and you are now certified in Alberta at level 1, you could move to PEI and you would be certified at the same level, entry level in PEI. It might not be called level 1 because, as I mentioned, the terminology varies across the country. But you could move to Manitoba and you would be certified as a child care assistant, which is also an entry level. The agreement requires that all provinces recognize that same level of certification. And I'm sorry, but I think there was another part to the question, Leah. Can you repeat that question?
so I think the other part is around, is it impacting, if that's what you have, will that impact their ability to continue working in Alberta? So if right now, if a person is working with that, level 1 course under their belt, will this potential framework impact their ability to keep working here?
I believe our understanding is that it will not impact negatively on that person, but what it might allow that person to do would be to look at other levels of certification, look at assessing their own competencies, and it may identify in the career path portion of the work that we're doing how they can move through the system to achieve higher levels of certification, other ECE credentials, so that they have more opportunities or options in their career in this particular sector.
Mm-hmm.
And if I could just add a couple of other points, the 54-hour orientation course is being redeveloped. We don't know the details yet or when that's going to be complete, but that may change what people are expected to do when they, newly certified people. We were also interested to learn that the majority of level 1s didn't get their certification through that orientation program, but through the other main option of doing the 3-credit post-secondary course, which I think about 65% versus 35% that did it through the orientation online course. So it does suggest to us that a lot of people are interested in post-secondary credentials, and if you do the 45-hour 3-credit course, it does give you some credit towards your certificate should you choose to, to continue your education.
Mm-hmm. We have a couple more minutes, so I'm kind of going to summarize some of these questions. So there's one question about, is there a particular province you think is doing a really good job of this, getting quality staff certified?
That's kind of a loaded question.
It is. So I don't know if anyone wants to approach that, or, I mean, you guys have done an excellent job of giving us an overview of the various differences and sort of where Alberta sits. So
I'll take an attempt at that question, but Jane or Nikki, feel free to jump in. It's different everywhere, and the systems that are set up in each province, they're set up within the priorities of what that province is trying to achieve, and it works within the system in that province. So I think it's impossible to say one does it better than another. They're different, but they are different because they are responsive to the early childhood sector in their own province or territory. So I don't know, Jane or Nikki, if you want to say anything more on that.
Well, I completely agree with you, Kathleen, that everybody does things differently and in keeping with what they need in their province. One of the things about Alberta, if you're saying where does Alberta compare, is it's one of the few jurisdictions that does not require anybody who's a frontline staff to have a 2-year diploma to work with any children. So that is something to consider, that most jurisdictions do require some number of individuals with a 2-year diploma. In Alberta, it's just the supervisor or director. And it also, the requirement is at a center level rather than at a group level. So it is quite possible in Alberta to have people with no post-secondary credential responsible for a group of children. So that is, something to consider. It's not to sort of put a ranking on all the provinces, but some provinces do require higher levels of credentials and at a group level rather than at a center level. If that, just to elaborate a bit.
The only thing I would add is that all provinces and territories are in the same boat in that they need a significant, they need to significantly increase their early learning and childcare workforce. So, in Alberta, we've heard between 9,000 and 13,000 new ECEs need to be recruited in order to fill the spaces created through the Canada-wide agreement. So that's a commonality across the province or across the country that all provinces and territories are dealing with.
Mm-hmm. So if you have time, I'll just summarize one more question, and I'll just let everyone else know if we didn't get to your question. Like Nikki said, they will look at the questions, and AC always keeps the questions and looks at them afterwards as well. Our AC Connects group does. So if you don't get your question directly answered now, and some of the questions can't be answered now because this is preliminary stages, but there's sort of questions about what does it look like for people who have more education and than just the 2-year certificate, and is it possible that another level will come out of this, and how would people attain that?
That's what we're looking at.
Yeah.
Don't have any answers at this point, but it's certainly a consideration.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's 8:02, so being respectful of everyone's time and the fact that people are in other time zones where it's much later than here. Thank you so much to all of you and your team for the work that you're doing, and we really look forward to hearing more about what else happens next. And so, as Nikki said, please feel free to share that link with others so that we can get as much feedback and engagement as possible. And thank you, everyone, for your participation tonight. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank
Good night.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye.